Okay, to continue on with Chapter 3, Day 1, if we think back to what we just did in class, we talked about categorical data. We had a class data of eye color, okay? Each class looks a little bit different, so that's why the numbers aren't quite the same. We talked about a marginal distribution, and we made a bar graph of the marginal distributions. The next thing we're going to talk about is what we call a conditional distribution. And a conditional distribution is the distribution of one variable based on another variable. So it's the distribution of one of the variables but based on another variable. Okay? So for example, I might say what percent of males have hazel eyes? What percent of males have hazel eyes? So out of all the males, what percent have hazel eyes? Well, if you look back at your chart, all right, these numbers are a little bit different, but what percent of the males have hazel eyes? Well, that would be the males that have hazel out of all the males. What percent of the males have hazel? It would be the hazel-eyed males out of all the males total. And so what we would do, we just write that as they have to be hazel and male out of male. And this little symbol here means and. Hazel and male out of all the males. That's what percent of the males. This piece is what goes out of the bottom. It's what we're out of. Out of the males, what percent have hazel eyes? And so hazel and male out of male. And we'll fill those numbers in class from our chart. Take a look at another conditional. What percent of hazel-eyed students are male? Well, now notice, of the hazel-eyed. So out of the hazel-eyed. So that's now out of all the hazel, what percent are male? Well, then again, it's male and hazel. So back at the chart, we're still looking at males and hazel, but out of all the hazel-eyed now, so it would be this many out of this total. So the condition, it's conditional because it's based on what it's out of. There's some conditions involved, okay? So we'll put that one in when we get back, all right? What percent of the females have blue eyes? So of the females then is going to go on the bottom, have blue eyes. So that's blue and female out of female. That little upside down U means and. It's almost like an A without a thing across it. And we'll fill those numbers in too. You can try to fill them in from your chart, and then I'll check them when we get in class. Okay? Now, we talked about graphical displays. If it's conditional, we're going to use what we call a segmented bar graph. Okay? Over here, marginal, we used a bar graph. Just a bar for each color eye. Conditional, we're going to use segmented. So when we get done, it's going to look something like this. Now don't draw this because we're going to draw the one for your class in class, but it's going to look something like the following. Okay? I could draw of an eye color amongst the females. All right, so I'm just going to do one then since it's just female. So out of all the females, what's the distribution of eye color? And so that's what's going right in here is all the eye colors. And so you'll have a percent that's brown, and maybe that's here at the bottom. You have a percent that's blue. You'll have a percent that's hazel. And you have a percent that's green, and I would leave that open. But a segmented bar graph then is looks at percentages, and I got 25, 50, 75, and 100%. And out of 100% of the females, among the females, what is the display of eye color? So what percent are brown? What percent are blue? What percent are hazel? What percent are green? And they're stacked on top of each other, okay? So for example, in my little example here, around 22%, let's say, are brown. That's not what our data is. We'll make it for real in class. Now, this distance might be only 10, right? So let's say blue was 10. Then I stack 10 on top of this. And let's say the next is 15. I stack it on top. And then I stack the remaining on top. And it should add up to 100, or like in class, we're very close to 100%. So if I want to display conditional, I do a segmented. And I could do one for the females. And then if I wanted to, I could also do one for the males with its distribution. So you could compare, say, you could take a look at the differences between males and females. In this case, you would notice, wow, look how big this group is for females, but not as big for males. You use it to make comparisons. So when we get to class, we're going to fill in the blanks here. We know what a conditional distribution is now. We're going to figure out what percent this is. We're going to figure out what percent this one is, and what percent this one is. And then for our conditional graphical display here, we're going to figure out these percentages. Again, just the females right now. What percent are brown, blue, hazel, and green. And we're going to make a segmented bar graph to go with that. And that's what we're going to practice in class.